What is going on, everyone? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the season finale of Season 3 of Fargo. This episode is called Somebody to Love, and now we can look at the season in its entirety. We can do compare and contrast between the different seasons, talk about which is our favorite. The big question for the last couple episodes has been, will episode 10 of Season 3 stick the landing in a way that makes the overall season as satisfactory as Season 1 and Season 2? Admittedly, there are a lot of people who think Season 3 is the strongest to date. I do not share that view, but I totally get that everybody's got their favorites, which I think is a hallmark of a very, very strong show when there's a lot of conversation about what are the best episodes, what are the best seasons. I mean, take something like Batman, the animated series from the 90s. If you ask people what their favorite episode is, you'll get 30 different answers, which means obviously there were a lot of great episodes in the entire run of that particular show. I should say in advance that I will be going pretty heavily into spoilers from this episode, so if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, or you haven't seen this season, I strongly encourage you to do so, because even if I find Fargo Season 3 to be slightly below the other two, it is still a dynamite season of television. It is a riveting crime thriller. I've just got some lingering disappointment or frustrations about where the story went, or dangling plot lines and that sort of thing, which ultimately make me keep a little bit of my enthusiasm in check. That said, this whole season was worth watching to see Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Nikki and David Thewlis as Varga. Those two characters, for me, made the season. I was fascinated by both. Ultimately, I knew pretty much from the get-go that neither character was going to end up in the most enviable position by the end, and that they are criminals. Sometimes criminals get away with their crimes in this show. I mean, usually in the Fargo tradition, dating back to the Coen Brothers movie from the 90s, we have a really, really corrupt, nasty, weak-willed man who, through trying to take shortcuts or trying to screw people over, sets in motion a series of horrible events that ultimately cause a hell of a lot of harm to the people around them before finally they get their comeuppance, which was obviously kind of the Jerry Lundegaard scenario in the first Fargo. Ewan McGregor played a very similar character with Emmett Stussy in this season, and while I think Ewan McGregor delivered an absolutely powerhouse performance, it just wasn't like a William H. Macy level performance, or even Martin Freeman's performance in Season 1 of Fargo. I feel like Season 1 of Fargo is still the template for the perfect crime saga set in this environment. And I hope we will continue to see more crime sagas set in this environment, because buffs of hard-boiled fiction and or film noir, this is basically just like a cornucopia of suspense and pleasure and excitement and thrills, and my world will be incomplete without Fargo now that it is drawn to a close. But let's dig into this episode and talk a little bit about what worked and what doesn't. Because for me, this episode is a little bit of a mixed bag. I was really hoping that this would be the best episode of the season, and there are parts of it that were fucking sensational. But I've got some issues with how this episode and season drew to a close, but I also would love to hear if anyone else is feeling the same way. But let's get into some specifics. One of the things I really liked about this episode was the way that it incorporated the opening warning that, the following events that you have seen are based on true events that happened in 2011, yada, yada, yada. The names have been changed. But they incorporate the text into Gloria'S resignation that she is currently writing. She's fed up. She's had enough. But LaRue Dollard, our lovable IRS agent, who are IRS representatives, or the agents? If you work for the IRS, what exactly is your title? In any case, the guy who works for the IRS. Through the help of the information that was sent to him by Nikki Swango, he has pieced together this giant conspiracy that's been going back ever since Varga first lent money to Emmett and Cy. What used to be a totally legitimate company has now borrowed roughly $200 million to line their own pockets, and it has all the classic red flags of a gigantic scam. Ordinarily, this policy of borrowing heavily and then trying to sell off the assets is totally legal if you pay the appropriate taxes. And in this case, Varga is not. Varga's plan is to squirrel the funds away and to get the hell out of Dodge before too much hellfire and damnation is brought down on his head by Nikki and her partner in crime, Mr. Wrench. Last spoiler warning. If you've seen the episode, you know that this is my wish is not possible, but seeing Mr. Wrench and Nikki in action together when they're getting ready, and she's finally learned sign language and they're communicating, and she's laying out all of her weapons and she's identifying different weapons almost like cards in a game of bridge. I was like, God damn, can we get an entire season of Nikki and Mr. Wrench teaming up fucking people up because they just make this great team. He's a total lethal motherfucker, but obviously he can't speak. She is a very, very lethal girl in her own right, but they just make this perfect team. I just love watching them in action, and I love their chemistry, especially due to the way they met, the way they were forced to survive together, and they're a natural dynamic duo in a lot of ways. Emmett finally shows a little get up and go and tries to make a last-ditch effort to redeem himself. He reaches for Mimo's gun and pulls it out, and as he points it at Varga, and Varga has all these henchmen with weapons moving in to take Emmett out, Varga has one of his classic speeches about wealth and innovation and banking and pornography and all these things. He starts talking about Italy in the 1500s, and it's all an elaborate smokescreen to keep Emmett confused and doubting himself so that Mimo can sneak up behind him. But the best is Varga takes some of his banaka that he's always using for that foul, rotten, pestilence-ridden, disgusting mouth of his, and he sprays Emmett in the eyes right before Mimo jacks Emmett in the back of the head with a fire poker. In any case, they get the hell out of there. They go to this big clandestine meeting at this abandoned warehouse where they're supposed to be making a swap with Nikki, where they're going to give her all this cash. She's going to turn over the hard drives, and they'll be done with it. But as it turns out, it is a giant ambush staged by Mr. Wrench and Nikki. Most of Varga's men bite the dust, but Varga sneaks away at the last second, right as it looks as if Nikki's about to take him out. But Nikki has this great moment where she struts in holding the shotgun, and she has this great hero music. I have a little bit of a crush on Mary Elizabeth Winstead. I'm not ashamed to admit that for me that was quite a geeky thrill, seeing her in kind of badass bitch mode about to take on the bad guy. Sadly, Varga sneaks away. So let's get into some of the areas where I started to feel a little bit of disappointment. Turns out Goldfarb's in league with Varga, and essentially now her company has bought all the assets of Stussy for about $100,000, which obviously they were worth considerably more, but her empire is complete. I was hoping for her character to have just a little bit more of a big dramatic reveal or something really, really important. Granted, she tells Emmett he needs to file Chapter 11 and his life as he knows it is over, but she also tells him that some of his money has been tucked away for safekeeping so that he'll be fine. It's a perfectly adequate, satisfactory conclusion to that particular storyline. Just when you have an actress of that caliber, it seemed as if all signs were pointing toward her character playing a much bigger role in the finale. As it turns out, that was not the case. My favorite part of this episode is when Emmett stops on the highway and has this big dramatic showdown with Nikki. She's got a shotgun pointed at him. She's asking him if it's possible for him to go any lower. Emmett obviously feels an incredible shame and desperation, and his life's completely fallen to pieces, and he knows it's all his fault. She says some really sweet things about how his brother Ray is now inside of a kitten. I mean, if one subscribes to reincarnation, it's a very, very sweet moment. Otherwise, it's a totally delusional moment. But she claims that she looked into the eyes of the kitten and that Ray is there. So they're having this face-off, and a highway patrolman pulls up. Nikki hides her shotgun. Emmett's trying to basically warn him about how dangerous Nikki can be. Nikki keeps kind of sliding off, trying to reach her gun. The guy warns her repeatedly, do not move, don't take another step, yada, yada, yada. And Emmett jumps out of the way as Nikki and this cop unload on one another. Both go down. And what I've loved about every single season of Fargo is that they always wait until the final episode of each season to use the original Fargo score from the movie. I mean, watch the opening credits for Fargo the movie. It's one of those bone-chilling, just achingly beautiful and haunting pieces of music I've ever seen in a movie as this car is driving through the snow. And we always get a taste of it at the end of each season. Each season uses little variations on the theme, but we don't get the classic theme. And so as we see the camera panning over Nikki's body with the bullet in her head, we get this huge swell of the original Fargo song. I'm actually almost getting misty-eyed thinking about it. It's really powerful, juicy stuff. Emmett hops back in his car and he skedaddles. Now we get to the point where I've got some lingering, questions and or frustrations. We flash forward 5 years. Inman is back with his family. He's been forgiven by his wife. It is rumored that he has $20 million tucked away, but it's never been proven. He and his family are fully assembled. Cy is there, and he's in a wheelchair, but he's kind of half functional. And somehow everybody's supposed to just ignore the fact that Emmett was complicit in the fact that his best friend was poisoned, and clearly his health has been forever changed. And I was starting to get a little irritated that everybody around Emmett is just kind of pretending everything he did with Varga didn't happen. Granted, payback is coming. Mr. Wrench sneaks into his house and blows his brains out, but it all feels very last minute, very thrown together. It doesn't feel as if that ending's in an organic extension or conclusion to where we were going. Maybe I'm just being nitpicky. I mean, as we saw in the original Fargo, Lundegaard's just chilling in a hotel room when the cops finally catch up with him and they just drag him out unceremoniously. And this is in a similar vein, but I was just hoping for something bigger for the end of Emmett. I mean, Martin Freeman's character in the end of season 1, when he's running out onto the ice and drops through, that's a big dramatic finish. So I was a little frustrated there. And then we get a scene in Homeland Security where Gloria is now working and Varga's been picked up, and they have this interrogation scene. And I can tell they were going for something almost like a mysterious, enigmatic ending like the end of Sopranos, where Tony had that classic look and the cut to black. But Gloria's basically saying that Varga's going to spend the rest of his life in jail eating mashed potatoes out of a box, whereas she's going to go to the county fair with her son and eat fried Snicker bars and have a fine time. Varga claims that in 5 minutes, a man's going to walk through the door and say that he's free to go. And the lights fade to black on Varga, and we end with Gloria looking at the clock, just watching it. And she's looking through a window in the doorway, and we're just basically waiting to see, as the clock winds down, will somebody come and say that Varga's free to go, or will Varga spend the rest of his life in jail? We will never find out. We will never know. It allows us to have a discussion and a debate. But man, I was just hoping for something a little bit more satisfying, a little more conclusive. And I guess if this were to be the last episode of Fargo ever, I have to say, I'm not a completely satisfied fan. It's almost like they gave me 3/4 of a really, really good meal, but I'm waiting for that final course to come through and make the meal feel complete. So while I love this season, and I had a blast following it and reviewing every episode as they came out, I would not say it was a complete home run for my specific taste, but if people regard this as the finest Fargo season, I will not dispute that. As I said before, Varga and Nikki are two of my all-time favorite characters in the history of the Fargo franchise, so I thoroughly enjoyed the ride. It's a little bittersweet, but it's all over now, and I have to accept that and move on with my life. Would love it if people could give me some recommendations on what to do now with my Wednesday nights. I don't have a Wednesday night show anymore. And we got Star Trek on the horizon. We got Game of Thrones on the horizon. I'm thinking about following a few other things, but I would love to have 1 or 2 more shows in my lineup. So for everybody who's given me recommendations so far, I greatly appreciate it. What I'm definitely going to be doing is a lot more movie reviews. My podcast, Wrong Reel, is where I do most of my movie-related activity. But I want to start doing more movie reviews here on this channel, and I want to start doing more flashback reviews. But also, I just really want to follow some more kick-ass TV shows. In any case, for those of you who stuck with me through the season, thank you so much for watching all my videos. Thank you so much for all the comments. Part of the fun of a show that comes every week is the bullshitting by the water cooler on Monday morning, or in this case, Wednesday evening, where you debate what happened in the episode. That's part of the fun, like watching a show that comes out all in one fell swoop. It's cool to binge it and rip right through it and then it's over, but it doesn't open itself up to conversation or debate nearly as much as a weekly installment, whereas like Twin Peaks, a huge chunk of the fun is everybody debating in between the episodes what the fuck is going on in Twin Peaks. So I definitely lean towards these weekly shows because they just are a lot more fun in terms of audience engagement and so on and so forth. But as always, thank you so much for watching my channel. I really, really appreciate it. Please leave me a comment in the comments below, or if you want to, give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax. And I'll be back at y'all probably tomorrow. I think I'm going to see the new Sofia Coppola film, The Beguiled. But as always, onwards and upwards.